Welcome back to Genetics in the Paddock with Emily. I'm your host, Emily Johnston, and I'll be taking you along on my journey to learn about all things genetics in extensive livestock. Last season, we explored the foundational aspects of genetics. We discussed everything from basic genetic principles to practical applications on farm. This season, we're kicking it up a notch. Today's guest is Peta Bradley, who is the Manager of SheepGenetics. Some of the topics we're going to discuss include the trends across merino, terminal and maternal industries over the years, some future insights, personal reflections, and more. This is an episode I can guarantee you'll want to stick around for, and one you'll enjoy. So with that, let's get into it. Welcome back to another episode of Genetics in the Paddock with Emily. Today I'm joined by Peta Bradley, who is the manager over at SheepGenetics within MLA. And I'm really looking forward to sitting down and having a chat with her today. I've worked with her a little bit in the past, but I'm interested to do a bit more of a deep dive into who she is and what makes her the great manager of SheepGenetics. So thanks so much, Peta, for sitting down with me today. I know you have a very busy schedule, so I appreciate you making some time to sit down and have a chat.
No problems, Emily. Thanks very much for having me on.
Thank you. So I guess let's just do a big deep dive into who you are. So we've spoken a little bit in the past, but I'm interested to dig a little bit deeper. So how did you get started in the ag industry? Did you grow up around agriculture? Was it just something that you were always interested in? Was it a last minute decision? Take me back and tell me how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, I'm very fortunate to have grown up on a sheep and cropping property near a place called Armatree in central west New South Wales, about a bit over an hour northwest of Dubbo. So I've grown up here. It's been a family farm, and both my parents are actually very actively involved in the farm. So my dad was an agronomist in a former life, and it's actually my mother's family farm that we're on, and she's quite passionate about sheep. So grew up surrounded by farming with my younger brother Jack. And I guess one thing, my parents actually never forced either my brother or I to ever consider a career in agriculture. They were always very, very supportive and wanting to show us the opportunities of farming and agriculture. But if we wanted to go and be artists, I'm sure they would have supported us either way as well. So that was a really big part of us growing up. And my brother and I spent a lot of our childhood on the farm and being involved. And then I guess as I started to go through school, I had a bit of a love for numbers and for particularly science when I was going through school, and that's a really logical connection through to agriculture and agricultural systems. And my parents were very encouraging of that while we were growing up, talking about you'd be going out looking at the crops and talking about what was happening in the soil and looking at sheep and talking about, the reproductive cycle or the digestive system and why we did things certain ways. So we're always encouraged to ask those sort of questions. I guess that's really how I got started in agriculture and developed a bit of interest, and particularly sort of mid to late high school, really began to consider that as a potential career path.
Lovely. That sounds like a really nice start, and it sounds like you would have got a really strong foundational understanding of where you might like to sit in the ag space as well, just asking all different questions and kind of seeing what piques your interest. So I guess when you went to uni, did you say? Yeah.
Yes, yeah, I studied rural science at the University of New England.
And did that help you kind of understand that genetics in particular, or anything within that space? Was that kind of highlighted in your early university days that's kind of where you might like to sit, or did you kind of go down a few different routes? Like how did things go from there?
How did I end up in genetics? Yeah. It's a bit of a funny story. Growing up, I mentioned we had a sheep and cropping farm. Part of our sheep operation is actually running a stud. So my parents have got a Border Leicester stud they manage with my brother now, and they were recording with SheepGenetics. And I remember I got pulled out of year 9, I think it was at the time, because I was getting to ask a few questions about data capture and recording, and Dad was going along to a group of breeders, of other Border Leicester breeders, as part of what they what they call a performance group, super boarders at the time, and we went down to Wagga, and I had a couple of days off school at this group conference. And I remember at that conference there was two people from Sheep Genetics, Hamish Chandler and Alex Ball, went along and were talking to the breeders that were present about recording sheep genetics, what it all meant, and that really sparked my interest. And I thought, that's a pretty cool job. I wouldn't mind actually doing something like that in the future, and began to look around for genetics. And when I was looking at university, Armidale really stood out as kind of the hub of where all things genetics is based. So I'd actually already started to think about that, by year 10, that genetics might have been something that I was interested in. So pick subjects to enable me to get into rural science, and went along straight out of school into uni. And then I guess, the beauty of rural science, it did make me go and consider the cropping systems and the other plant systems and how they all interact. It didn't just enable me to, just focus on genetics, which is maybe what I wanted to do straight away. But I think having that good system understanding has been really, really invaluable. So, and then of course, during university, picked a couple of genetics units on top of the standard units and a few sheep units as well, and also did some honours in some basic genetic parameter estimation, and connected with a lot of the researchers that I work with now in my current role. So that's kind of my progression from a naive 14, 15-year-old that met a couple of people that were doing a job that I was interested in.
That's really cool. I think sometimes it is the people that can really inspire you and help choose that direction, especially at an early age. I feel like that's where you figure out what really interests you. So I guess, how did you go after you finished uni? Did you land a job straight away in genetics, or because it seems like that was, a fair focus for a long time for you, and you seemed quite driven to make that happen. So was that something that happened as a first job, second job? How did you get to where you are now as manager of sheep genetics?
Yeah, so when I was finishing up in my final year, beginning to look at all sorts of opportunities. Having gone straight from school to uni, I was pretty keen to get out into the workforce. And basically, I was halfway through my fourth year, and I saw a role. A couple of lecturers actually pointed out that there was a role being advertised with sheep genetics, which is not something, whilst it was a field I was always interested in, I never expected that I would go straight into sheep genetics, which was the Merinos Select Development Officer role at the time. So that was advertised, and I actually started in my last few months of my rural science degree. So got my feet under the desk before I'd finished, and started off in the Merinos Select Development Officer role. I also moved on then to the Senior Development Officer within Sheep Genetics. So was in the SG team for, I think it was about 3.5, 4 years, and then had the opportunity to still stay within the genetics team, but branch out into the project manager for the livestock genetics research and development portfolio in MLA. So that was really good opportunity. I had learned a lot at my time at Sheep Genetics, but also now got to manage some pretty cool research and development projects in beef and sheep. So got to see, the concepts of genetics are the same regardless of the species. There's just different challenges. So that was a really good opportunity. So I had a couple of years doing the R&D, and then have come back, and I've been, I think, in the Sheep Genetics manager's role now for nearly 2.5 years, and nearly 7 years in the livestock genetics team at MLA, I think, as of July this year.
That's exciting, and it sounds like those few different roles would have given you maybe some different perspectives or different outlooks on how things happen from an MLA perspective, or maybe just from a producer level as well, kind of seeing how it might affect different people. And I feel like that's probably given you some real strengths coming into this role as well. So what do you kind of feel like, how do you feel like your earlier roles have influenced the current role that you're in now? Have you taken pieces from that and it's given you kind of a different perspective to what you thought? Do you take pieces from those roles into this? How has it kind of shaped your outlook at the moment?
I think I'm so fortunate to have worked with a great bunch of people through all my roles. whether it's the producers on the ground. And I think my early roles in particular, where we're working directly with some of the leading ram producers in the country, but gave me a really good grounding of, this is what's happening on the ground, how producers are recording data, what are the challenges that they encounter on day to day on the farm to have sheep that are performance recorded and to be selling rams into industry with breeding values, and how do we work together to overcome them. But also equally in those my first couple of years at MLA and Sheep Genetics, I got to work with and people I still work with now, the research scientists at, say, the Animal Genetics and Breeding Unit. These people are pretty impressive individuals, really, really good scientists, but also have a really good commercial grounding, a lot of them. So to be able to work, I guess, across the genetics, I call it the genetics supply chain. So you've got commercial producers purchasing rams with breeding values. You've got the seed stock ram producers that are doing a lot of the data collection and recording and selling those rams to industry and driving genetic progress in their seed stock flocks and herds. And then you've got the sheep genetics team, which is where we sit in terms of delivering the numbers to industry and making sure we've got good systems to be able for people to access genetic evaluation information, right through to the research scientists that are doing the research and development projects, capturing new data, and then also creating and continuing to build our genetic evaluation systems and engines that drive sheep genetics and also the breed plan evaluations. So to be able to work with all of those people throughout my career is really important, but also continuing to stay connected somewhat to the commercial producer, because that's really where we realise the benefits of genetic progress, and we need to have them in the forefront of our mind whenever we embark on R&D, is how does this actually get delivered to the people on the ground where genetics is realised and expressed.
Absolutely. I think that sounds like a really great way that you've, come from development officer, working on ground, and then kind of getting to see it through the projects, and where you are now, it sounds like that's just created this really lovely, holistic, big picture that makes so much sense. So now that you're in the manager role, what do you enjoy most about what you do now? What gets you out of bed in the morning?
I think we've got a fantastic team, both within Sheep Genetics. We've got a fantastic client base with our Sheep Genetics clients, and we've got a great research team. So the fact I get to get out of bed each day and work with all of those people is pretty amazing. Sure, it's not without its challenges, but I think for genetics and for me, the real, I guess, excitement, it comes from being able to do research and development and having a really clear pathway. We're going to create a breeding value, and we're going to deliver a breeding value and indexes to help people select for a new trait or improve their selection for existing traits to make faster rates of genetic gain. That clear pathway to adoption for me within the genetics field is the most exciting, and we can really have tangible impacts. So we're actually in the middle at the moment of just finalising and getting ready to release our annual enhancements to the sheep genetics evaluation from the research and development that's happened. And things like we can now accept data from some processors that are using devices like the MEQ probe to measure intramuscular fat and DEXA to measure lean meat yield. These are commercial products that have been developed after years and years of R&D that are embedded in some processors. We can now use that data into the genetic evaluation. So opening up that pathway, and it basically enhances selection for those traits, which is really cool. That's what gets me out of bed each morning.
That's awesome. It sounds like all of these advancements that you guys implement are also just really well thought out and are going to be really beneficial for different areas of the supply chain as well. And I couldn't agree more with you in the sense that the people really do make the team. Like, being surrounded by great people just really makes it feel so much worth it, and just seeing the end result. I did want to ask, I guess it's a bit more of a personal question, but I'm assuming that you still have ties to your family farm, your mum's property, and being in the current role you are now, how do you feel like your outlook on genetic improvement has changed, or you kind of sit into different seats? Because I guess you have a foot in the producer space and a foot in, sheep genetics being a bit more of a research area. Do you feel like you have differing outlooks? How do you kind of feel about that?
Yeah, so I'm not directly involved in the family business at the moment, given we're actually a client of Sheep Genetics as well. So I do try and stay a distance, and my brother, mother and father are all part of that family business. But I get the opportunity to be on ground to just help out. And I think for me, to be able to continue to have that connection, so to go out on a weekend and still do some basic data collection out there at lambing time, doing lambing rounds, it keeps me really connected to the challenges of some data recording. It makes me think differently about traits. I think it helps me consider things from the point of view of a lot of our sheep genetics clients, but then also commercially, we've got a commercial operation as well. What is the benefit, or how do we measure the benefit that genetics or improved genetics is having on our bottom line, which are all challenges that I think we need to continue to consider when we're going and doing some really exciting new blue sky research and development. So the fact that I'm able to still have that sort of involvement with the family business, I like to think helps me keep connected to our sheep genetics clients and to the commercial sheep producer as well. So I think I'm pretty lucky I get the best of both worlds.
Absolutely. I feel like that personal touch is amazing, and especially when you're talking to producers, I guess it would give you that perspective of being able to relate to them or understand some of their challenges, or maybe even see some yourself, and as well as the opportunities, which is really, really nice to hear. Circling back a few topics ago, so you guys work quite closely with producers in a bit more of a hands-on capacity. So how have you found the process of targeting information at seed stock versus commercial producers with things like, I guess, just the basics of helping them form a breeding objective?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Emily. And the big thing for me, and within sheep genetics, so we have about 1,200 sheep genetics clients, predominantly in Australia. We do have a handful of international clients as well. And our seed stock producers, many of them are looking at genetic information and using it at many different points within the calendar year. So they're making mating decisions, they're making culling decisions, they're making, which rams go into the ram sale, which rams do I keep, which rams, might I go and purchase from a sale or purchase semen from. So our seed stock producers are using this information and collecting data all the time throughout the year. So generally, they're thinking about genetics a lot. The commercial producer, most of the time, where they make their most genetic progress or when they influence their genetics is when they go to a ram sale. So it's a once a year, generally, once a year activity, as well as maybe some classing decisions for use. So their head's not looking at the detailed numbers like we might be every day within our roles. So how we look and provide information and target information needs to be different. And so we've got commercial producers that might be really interested in genetics and have a really good handle, but we also recognise that a lot are only looking at once a year. So we want to make sure we've got some clear resources and really clear access pathways to genetic information when the producer needs it. So I guess as sheep genetics, our clients are the ram breeders, and we're doing a lot more around, it's not just using the breeding values, it's actually data recording, capturing data, working with our service providers that might be out helping producers as well. Whereas the commercial producer very much comes under MLA's adoption program. So how do we get better on-farm practices and uptake of all things, not just genetics, because genetics just doesn't happen in isolation. We need to make sure that a lot of other, best practice on-farm management is occurring as well. So instilling, I guess, genetics messages alongside other key production messages for our commercial producers is really important, whereas our seed stock producers, our sheep genetics clients, there's a lot more involved in the intricacies of data capture.
Absolutely. I think that definitely explains it very well. And you were saying that you've worked in sheep genetics for a few years now, and working so closely with those seed stock producers, how have you seen their breeding objectives change over time or things of interest?
Yeah, look, there's some really good trends and and changes, I think the important thing is that the fundamentals of key production traits that drive profit, they've always been important, and I think should always continue to be important within any producer's breeding objective. As our evaluations have developed and we've got new traits, but also new traits enabled by genomic selection, we've really seen producers incorporate what we deem as hard to measure traits into their objective and really successfully make genetic progress for those harder to measure traits in combination with key production traits that have always and continue to be important. So if I think about, we've got three main evaluations within sheep genetics. We've got our Merinos Select evaluation, our terminal lamb plan, and our maternal lamb plan evaluation. So for Merinos, looking at, say, genetic trends and also data, of course, fleece weight has always been an important component of the breeding objective. So has growth rate and, some wool quality traits. So we've historically had good genetic progress for those. We're starting to see now more health and welfare traits being incorporated into breeders' objectives. So I think we've seen well over 100% increase in the amount of breech wrinkle records submitted into sheep genetics compared to when I started. So we're getting a lot more data, and our genetic trend is also improving for breech wrinkle as well. So that's one that really sticks out in my mind. Reproduction is the other one for Merinos. So historically that had been quite limited by the lack of pedigree information. DNA, both just for parentage but also genomic selection, has really enabled merino producers to capture better data around the key components of reproduction. So conception, did she get in lamb, litter size, how many fetuses, and then ewe rearing ability, what proportion of her litter did she actually go on to successfully rear. So we're starting to see more data for reproduction, and of course reproduction is an important profit trait, so people are starting to select for that more, and we're seeing some really good trends. So that's the merino example that really sticks out in my mind. From a terminal sire perspective, historically, again, trends for growth have always been strong, increasing muscle have always been strong. I actually had some reports from early lamb plan days back in 1992 I was looking at the other day that had those two traits reported in it, and good genetic trends. So they've been around for a long time, and they're continuing to go in the right direction. But in recent years, and with genomic selection and data capture through our reference populations, we've seen intramuscular fat sort of be monitored. We saw it was heading in the wrong direction. There's now breeding values available. It's included intramuscular fat and shear force, so tenderness is included in our terminal sire indexes, and we've seen those trends basically turn around to be heading in the favourable direction for both of those traits, whilst still improving the important profit traits like lean meat yield. So I think the eating quality is the one that sticks out in my mind for terminals, and whereas our maternal breeds, so this is our breeds like our composites, Coopworths and Bord Leicesters predominantly. Of course, again, growth and reproduction for those guys has been important, but we also know that as we're entering, into sort of looking at sustainability and health and welfare, not just of the animal, but also of people and operators on sheep farms, we've seen mature size become an important component in those objectives for our maternal breed. So we want sheep to grow quick, have more lambs, but also we know that there's a genetic correlation that tells us as we're doing both those things, the sheep that do those genetically are bigger. And that comes with all sorts of handling and shearing considerations, as well as now, methane and feed intake. So how do we breed sheep that, have lambs that grow fast, have lambs and keep them alive, but then also equally as importantly, not be massive. So trying to cap mature weight. So that's, and we're starting to see that with our trends as well. Those production traits are continuing to go up, and we're starting to see a flat line in our maternal adult weight trend. So certainly production is still important, but we're seeing new traits being added into the objective, and new technologies like genomics and the evolution of our evaluations is enabling producers to add more traits in but not compromise genetic progress for production traits.
That's really interesting to hear. Thanks so much for sharing those insights, Peter. It sounds like, those fundamental traits will always be important, but it's interesting as well to hear about how genomics has potentially made other traits which are harder to measure something that's a bit more of interest to producers and seems a bit more attainable. I did want to draw on something that we spoke about a bit before, and I feel like it might link to what we just spoke about, but you did mention in your early stages of finding out that genetics was something of interest to you, that you went along to a performance group. So are they still prevalent within the sheep genetics space, sheep genetics industry? I guess, can you tell me a little bit more about them and the role they play? Because it sounds like from early on they were quite a big piece to the puzzle with maybe supporting producers on ground. So is that still around today, and what role do you guys play within those?
Yeah, so sheep genetics, and even prior to sheep genetics being formed in 2005, and it was just lamb plans, so just the terminal and maternal breeds, performance groups have had an integral role in actually getting them up and running, and getting lamb plan, that is, up and running, and getting our across breed and across flock evaluations that we know today that have been around in lamb plan for now more than 20 plus years. The performance groups have really been integral to those. So the ones that really stick out in my mind that we work really, really closely with is the Meat Elite group, the Super White group. So Meat Elite is Poll Dorset, Super Whites is White Suffolk, and also the Super Border group, which is where I had my first exposure to sheep genetics and the sheep genetics team, which is for Border Leicester breeders. We also have worked with a number of other groups. We've got some groups of merino producers that have been involved in projects. But I guess, those groups were really integral to the early days of lamb plan and sheep genetics, but they're also now really, really important to sheep genetics in our current business form. So these groups are groups of producers that get together annually generally, but also have plenty of discussion outside their annual face-to-face get together around genetic progress and sharing of genetics. So we generally support them going along to their annual conferences, talking about genetic trends within those groups. It's very much a two-way conversation. They're really a great group to bounce we've got new developments or new traits or new tools coming out. They're a really good group to test those things out, and they're also really open with their feedback. So it's been a really nice, I guess, symbiotic relationship between sheep genetics and these performance groups over many years now. And we see often that these groups are making above average genetic progress. Many of them are compared to the rest of the breed or the analysis. So these are really our elite end users, and are a really great way for sheep genetics to engage with collective groups of breeders. And this year we had a really successful Super Whites and Meat Elite, so two breeds, and the performance group for each breed actually had a combined meeting down in Albury. We were down there supporting those meetings for 3 or 4 days, and yes, we have sessions, but we're also invited into general conversations with them. And it's not just sheep. They had pig geneticists come along, and we were able to have really open conversations around what learnings can we take from the pig breeding programs into our Poll Dorset and White Suffolk breeding programs. So really great groups to work with. And as you mentioned, that's kind of how I had my foray into sheep genetics as well.
I love that. That sounds like a really important part of just working together and working towards a common goal, and that symbiotic relationship you mentioned would be just so important just for soundboarding new ideas and just seeing how things fly. And it would be interesting to see their perspective as well, and sharing that. I think, that sounds like an absolutely great resource that you guys have. So happy to hear it. I think collaboration is great. You mentioned that, these performance groups have been going for quite a while now, and we've spoken a bit about trends. So how far have you guys come with genetics adoption in the sheep space? Because it sounds like a very progressive industry and a group of people that really want to keep driving that genetic improvement as best as they can.
Yeah, so I guess the genetic trends within those groups we generally see are ahead. And the eating quality example with the Super White and Meat Elite groups is a really good one, where they began to turn their trends around. So starting to improve eating quality and reduce shear force even before we started to see that across the board in the industry trends. And I think a lot of the genetics, and through the selection decision they've made, has made their way through to the rest of the analysis as well. So, there's a lot of sharing of genetics within the group, but also beyond the group. So that's been really important. But picking up on part of your question is around our genetics adoption. We've very much seen, we've just released our new annual report for sheep genetics from last financial year. We're continuing to see really, really strong growth in the number of clients within sheep genetics. I should have had the hard stats off the top of my head, Emily, but I think we've had nearly 400 new flocks register with sheep genetics since I started. So that's quite a significant, that's over just a period of 7 years. And there's been some significant growth within that 7-year period. But I think it's all well and good to have more flocks within sheep genetics, but bringing it back to, are commercial producers using genetics in their selection decisions? So are they purchasing rams with breeding values? And that's really where the focus of MLA's adoption program has been, is to make genetics easier to understand and how to use genetics effectively within your businesses. So that push that at a commercial level. So we've seen, since a baseline survey back in 2015, which indicated that there was approximately 30% of commercial producers that were utilising breeding values to purchase their rams, from work done over 22-23, so our latest survey, that's indicated that that's actually now a majority. So we've got over 56% of commercial producers now utilising breeding values produced by sheep genetics in their ram buying decisions. So that's really powerful, and I think that's also driven that commercial drive or want for breeding values to make decisions, has driven why we've seen the increase in numbers in sheep genetics as well. Not the sole reason, but I think a pretty important reason. So it's really good to see that now a majority of commercial producers are actually utilising breeding values when they buy rams.
That's great to hear, and I'm sure that number will continue to go up considering the support they receive from you guys, which just sounds like you're definitely looking to, make it easier for them in any way that you feel like is possible. So that's great to hear. Love to hear it. So circling back to maybe a bit more of a personal note, but what are some of the challenges or key learnings that you feel like you've learned throughout your career currently?
Tough one, Em. I definitely think one thing at university, you go and study and you spend 4 years looking, in my degree across all things to do with rural science. You're certainly not expected to know everything when you get out. And definitely the more I stay in genetics, the more I know, the less I know. Particularly when we get to work with the great research scientists that we do within our roles at Sheep Genetics. So certainly don't expect to know everything. Always be willing to learn and ask questions has been a really big learning for me, and continue to ask and challenge the status quo in the right way. Why are things done a certain way? Sometimes there's a logical reason why, but sometimes it's also, if you're asking the question, it might mean that there's something needs to change. So those two things are probably a really key learning. And the other one is never forget why we do what we do. It's really ultimately for the benefit of the commercial producer. So always having that at the forefront of, what you do on a day-to-day basis is really important, whether that be when you're going to design a new website or, make a decision about how to report something. Always thinking about how is this going to be used commercially is really important. Sometimes it's hard to do, but a really important thing to do. And be open. Through my time at Sheep Genetics, I've equally spent as much time looking at databases and websites and tech, which is certainly not something I ever thought I would do when I left school, studied at uni, and then I've ended up working with Sheep Genetics and MLA, and being open and working with sheep data and databases has been pretty fun and pretty cool, and a really good learning experience for me.
That's great. I think those are some great learnings, especially keeping the end user in mind when doing a lot of the things that you do. And I think like I resonated personally with what you said about, you know, coming out of uni and everything feels daunting and there's a lot of information to learn and sometimes you don't know where to start. But I think that is a great message, is just to keep learning, keep asking questions. I feel like, yeah, no question's a dumb question. So I feel like that's a great message to put out there. And I suppose I've asked everyone this on my podcast so far, so you're the next one. But if you had a crystal ball, what do you feel like the next 10 years looks like for sheep genetics? Could be based on trends, personal opinion. I'm interested to see what you think.
Yeah, so next 10 years, there's probably a whole heap of different things I'm crystal ball gazing and expecting to see. If I think about a trait level and what sort of traits in 10 years' time will we be looking at or selecting on, I think, as I mentioned before, production traits will continue to be there. Quality traits will continue to be important. But in terms of new traits, from our research and development projects that are underway at the moment, I'm expecting we will see methane and feed intake breeding values, you know, well before 10 years, over the next couple of years, and those incorporated into selection indexes. So we're doing that in a balanced way with those production traits. So that will, you know, certainly be part of our future. Some other new traits, continued health, welfare type traits, so things like fly strike, we might start to see. There's other projects that AGBU and AWI are involved in that will flow through to sheep genetics. So there's some really good new traits there that are really important that we'll start to see in our objectives. So that's what I'm thinking from a trait basis. And from an analysis point of view, we're just about to embark, we have embarked on a new research analysis for lamb plan to be released in 2025. Couple of hurdles to jump through technically that the team at AGBU are working on, where we're combining our terminal and maternal databases, lamb plan evaluation, so you can actually compare animals, any animal that currently sits within two separate ones, it's all in one. So being able to compare a lot more breeds head to head in the future, and there's options to expand that into even Merinos further down the track, so whether that's within 10 years, but I dare say by 2034 that if it hasn't happened, it's well underway. So I think that from an analysis point of view, we'll have some different looking evaluations in 10 years' time, of course underpinned by the science and genomics, that genomic evaluations or single step equivalent evaluations that we're used to seeing now in our major breeds. And I think genomics is, 10 years ago, I wouldn't have thought that we would have 600,000 genotypes by the end of this year, which is what we're expecting from Merino Select in the evaluation. If you told researchers that 10 years ago, I don't know if they would have maybe sent you to a mental asylum. So the fact that we've reached that, I'm looking forward to seeing what happens over the next 10 years with new genomic type technology coming on the market, and genomics not just for seed stock and for parentage, but genomics being widely used at a commercial level. So lambs being sold on auction platforms with flock profile tests, which are available from Merinos, but regardless of the breed of animals, and people, looking at genetic merit when they're making, just general commercial animal buying decisions, not just ram buying decisions. So there's really exciting things with traits, exciting things with evaluations, and exciting things with new genetic tools underpinned by genomics for the commercial producer.
So much happening. I love it. It sounds like such an exciting space to be a part of. And I know I'm definitely looking forward to watching and seeing how things continue to evolve. It sounds like you guys have got a lot of great ideas and a lot of work underway, which will definitely benefit a lot of people. So yeah, looking forward to watching that evolve. Yeah, I think that's all the questions that I had for you today, Peter. So I'd like to wrap it up by saying a huge thank you for taking some time out of your day to sit down and have a chat with me. It's been such a great conversation, and I feel like I've learned a lot about what you guys do at Sheep Genetics and, just the value of what you guys put out. So thank you so much for today. I appreciate it a lot.
No worries, Em. Thanks for having me on. Any opportunity to talk both sheep and genetics in the same conversation, I will be there.
Thank you. Well, I might have to get you on for another one. Thanks, Peter.
Sounds good. Thanks, Em.
And that brings us to the end of this episode of Genetics in the Paddock with Emily. I hope you found our discussion as enlightening as I did. This episode was produced by the Extensive Livestock Genetics team within the New South Wales Government. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to our podcast on your favourite platform, leaving us a review and sharing it with your friends and colleagues. Your feedback and support help us grow and reach more people who are passionate about livestock genetics. If you have any questions, comments or suggestions for future topics or people you'd like to hear on the show, please feel free to reach out to me on emily.johnston@dpi.newsouthwales.gov.au. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.